Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 144 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. As always, my name is Dr. David C. Noe, here in the vomitorium on a March afternoon with my good friend and tremendous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing all right. As you know, I've been fighting this virus for almost 3 weeks now, and that partially explains why we've been without a new episode for a little bit now. So I'm cough dropping and Dayquilling myself into submission, but I am really weary of this stupid virus.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. You know, I did a little bit of travel down to Florida, and then got back, and then you had this terrible sickness just dragging on and on. Yeah. So, listeners, we really wanted to get out a steady string of episodes back to the once per week schedule. Maybe we can get back to that, but the last few weeks have been kind of brutal.
Yes, yeah, it's been rough. But I feel like I maybe kind of turned a corner this week and I'm coming back. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I got to be honest. You know, it's been a challenging week in my other calling, which this is the avocation. My other calling, an actual calling of pastoring a church. There's been just a number of challenges involved with that, and so. You know, I in some ways hesitated. Should I come in today and record an episode? But frankly, I missed you, Jeff.
Yeah, I miss you too. Definitely, yeah.
And I thought, you know, with challenge, this is a good way to get my mind off things for a minute. And also, we have just a fantastic guest today coming back onto the program.
Yeah.
And talking with Gary D. Schmidt is always such a delight. And we had to bump him last week because of your illness.
Yeah.
Didn't want to have to bump him again this week.
Right. No, I'm really excited about this. I mean, he was so great last time. It's just a brilliant writer.
He is.
And just a beautiful soul.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah, and so I can't wait to talk to him about this new book.
That's right. Yep. So it was quite a while ago, wasn't it, Jeff? I think you did a little bit of research.
Yeah.
It was dug back into our archives.
Yeah, when we talked to him last, it was a little over 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Episode, what was it?
It was 25.
25. So seems like that would have been February.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep, I remember it was snowy. Yep.
Right. I remember when we were pretty amateurish at that point.
Yeah.
Not that we've arrived, but when we got him on the air, I think I said something like, it's hatchet weather out there.
Oh, that's right.
And that must have seemed like that's one of those things I'd like to retract because the listener had no context, right? Hatchet weather.
Hatchet weather.
Right. But sounds gruesome. But Gary had just told us that he had a backup of ice dams on his roof.
That's right. And he was up there hacking away, right?
On the top of his roof, hacking with a hatchet to make sure the ice didn't break through the roof.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
Boy, one of those awkward podcasting moments. So,
but it turned into a beautiful segue.
It was an excellent episode. So no hatchet weather, and we're not going to say smarch.
No,
but it's been strange climate wise here in West Michigan.
It has been these beautiful sunny days. I was wearing my sandals yesterday,
Crocs,
and then today it was kind of rainy and cold, and I've heard maybe some snow on the way.
That's what I heard as well.
It's cuckoo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Should we spend the next 45 minutes going on and on about the changing weather, or should we welcome Gary to the show?
Well, the old man in me would like to complain some more, but I think it's about time we welcome Gary to the show.
All right, let's do that then. Welcome back to the program, Gary. We're so glad that you are here this afternoon with us. How have you been since the last time we spoke?
Good. It feels like it hasn't been that long since we were together before.
It's been 3 years.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, so I think you were with us on episode 25, and here we are. I think this is episode 144.
144.
So, yeah.
And this is every week, right?
We try to. It doesn't always work out that way, but because we both have other stuff going on. But
sure.
Yeah, we try to make it as weekly as possible.
Wow, that's terrific. Yeah, it really doesn't seem like that long ago.
Yeah.
And so you've completed your work at our alma mater and former employer, Calvin University, and you're in full-time retirement now. Is that right?
Yeah, except I don't really call it retirement. I've never had the opportunity to be a full-time writer.
Right.
And years have gone by, and there's been the sabbatical occasionally, but the notion of just living as a full-time writer, depending upon that for everything in terms of income, and just making sure I get up every day and work my full day. So it feels like this is not so much a retirement as a transformation into a different sort of job.
I know. I remember last time we interviewed you, you were talking about kind of your discipline of 500 words a day. Well, now that you're retired, are you saying, well, I could do 1,000 now? Or do you try to stick to that?
No, in fact, it's as you may have imagined, it's exactly that, except for more projects.
Oh, I see.
So there's more books going on at one time now than I was ever able to do, obviously, when you're teaching.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do things I've never done before. It seems like you just don't want to continue on and just do exactly the same thing.
Sure.
So 3 of the projects right now, one is a kind of frog and toad book, if you remember the frog and toad.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. That's just started. We'll see how that goes. Another one is an adult novel, which I've never done before. And another is a ghost story. I've always wanted to write a ghost story.
Oh, interesting.
And so it feels like this is the opportunity to try very different things. Yeah.
So before we get into the meat of the episode, which is your brilliant novel, The Labors of Hercules Beal, I just wanted to ask a question about the writing of the adult novel, and it's a very specific question. I'm not a writer of fiction. I have read so many wonderful novels, and there are certain novels that are the benchmark, like some of Dostoevsky and Dickens and other things. And I think if I could do something that's remotely like that, I would just be so pleased. Is it difficult? Is there a kind of anxiety of influence now that you're writing an adult novel? Is it because those greats? Does it give you some kind of apprehension?
It's there are so many times, I'm sure you guys have the same sense. You read an adult novel, and you just go, well, dang, why do I even bother?
Yeah.
And or a middle grader, even you read something and you just say, why, my gosh, why try? So I don't want to try and be Charles Dickens, though that would be fun to try and do that sort of stuff. I've been thinking about this book for a long time, and it feels like I just want to give it a go and see what this would look like if I'm writing it for an adult audience. And maybe it won't work. I have to be open to that possibility, or I'll get way through it and I'll say, wow, this really stinks. I hope that doesn't happen. But I like the concept. I like the characters. It's a more leisurely pace than you can use for a middle grade novel. You can't have a long passages of description in a novel that a 14-year-old guy is reading. It's just not going to happen. I have a bigger vocabulary than I could use. That's a bigger deal. I'm also dealing with characters who have a lot more living behind them. And that gives me a lot to work with that I don't have necessarily for a kiddo who's just coming into his own or her own. So that gives me history that I can mess around with.
Sure.
So that's all fun.
Yeah, as a guitarist, I have that same kind of bittersweet experience when I go to see a performer, and you just say, "Okay, I'm done."
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So you mentioned Dickens. Are there any other authors, maybe more modern authors, that you kind of think of that to say, oh, this is a model for me, or is like that the people that kind of make you want to throw the pen down?
Oh, this is going to sound like a strange one, but Umberto Eco.
Yes.
When I read Name of the Rose, and that's old now, right? That must be 30, 40 years ago, right?
That's one of my favorites too, yeah.
Yeah, you just read that and you go, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, the structure of the book, all built around this labyrinthine library.
Right.
It's extraordinary. And it also reflects the issues that he's dealing with, and it also reflects how the characters are growing. I mean, it's fantastic.
Right.
And so you read that and you just go, oh, man, forget it. Or Peace Like a River is another one for me.
So because you are so deft now at the particular way of writing to young adults, it seems to me, I'm not saying it's not work, I'm sure it still is, but I've read, I think now 7 or 8, the most recent Hercules Beal. You really know what you're doing. It's clear.
Oh, thank you.
Is it difficult now writing an adult novel, turning off that voice? Because I can see you're at a juncture or something. What do I do here? The other kind of style you've developed is you've got it down. So if I were you, I would have trouble keeping that guy at bay because I'm trying to do something different.
Yeah, and again, I'm 100 pages into it, so who knows? I might get to 150 and say this really rots and move on. I just have to keep remembering audience, that my audience is bigger, older, more experienced, with a lot more living behind them too. And when I think about that, I have to understand then how this text, this story, is going to impact that writer. What's going to keep you turning the page? And it's different. It's completely different for a young adult novel or for a middle grade novel, where I kind of feel like I know that. I'm kind of deeply into that world, and it feels instinctive now when I know I'm going astray. I don't know that yet with this novel. So far, there's a whole bunch of characters, each of which has its own backstory. I feel myself delving into those characters and doing their backstories and then moving on to the next one. I'm not sure there's a unity yet. What's the overall thing that keeps all of these smaller stories together? Is it the location? Because the location is big. Is it the fact that they've all come to this place at this time and somehow that's going to matter? I don't know. I know that there's an old Quaker meeting house there, but I only know it's there because that was a Sunday school place I grew up in. I don't know if it's going to fit into this world at all. And I feel like I'm going to have to get through the whole book. It'll be a year and a half or so. And then once I've got that done, then I can go back and figure out if all of this stuff works together. And the answer might be it doesn't, but I hope it will.
Are you still kind of keeping it kind of under wraps at this point, or do you,
Oh no, it's it's a comic sort of idea behind it, and it was really helped to develop. My son helped me with this one. You know that there are towns across America, right, that you have a highway that's built and suddenly that town dies because there's just no way that it can keep up with all the cars racing past, which now ignoring that town, all the sort of things that town could have offered before, a diner, say, or a small hotel or a campsite or things, are ignored. And maybe you put a sign out on the highway, but people don't stop to get off because the exit's 12 miles ahead. So here's a town that is dying, and it's up in New England, it's up in Vermont. And it's considering, do we consolidate with someone else? Do we just end this town with its history, and on and on and on? And this high school kid comes up with a great idea. Why don't we hack into global positioning so that from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, 2 days a week, cars are told to get off the highway and they have to come through this tiny town. And so I just have done the first day now, where the town is now inundated with all these cars. So all these places now have all these, the rare bookshop, people stop there because they're just tired of driving. The diner is there. The sweet shop is there. There's a fire station over there with a dog outside. And so the kids, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
People are suddenly attracted again. So I don't know. There's a whole lot I don't know about this since I'm not a tech guy. I don't know if that's even possible. I don't know if it is. Yeah. I don't know how this is going to work. Do you do it 2 days a week? I don't know if that's going to be illegal, so it's somehow shut down. What I'm interested in is it good for the town in the end? Does the town stay what it wants to be, or is it now commercial? It itself is becoming just an attraction.
So you only have 100 pages done, but I'm going to buy an advanced copy because that's a great premise.
Isn't that a great premise? It feels really fun. And that was my son, David, who really worked up that idea.
It's fantastic. I don't think it matters whether it's technologically possible. People are going to suspend disbelief. No problem.
I hope so.
It's a very good idea, I would say. So I was going to ask, but Jeff anticipated it. I was going to ask, as you were describing the process of developing characters and setting, I was going to say, do you have one big controlling idea? Because most of the novels that I have really enjoyed, like Prayer for Owen Meany or Anna Karenina, they've got one idea and everything works toward that somehow.
Yeah.
Even though the subordinate ideas are also significant, but it sounds like you have it. So
yeah, I mean, is it possible to lose who you are? And the answer is yes. We all know that that's true. Is it possible on the level of a town to do that so it becomes something else? I mean, essentially just a Walmart in the end. And of course that's possible. And so then what do you value? So I guess maybe that's the big thing. What is it that you truly, truly value in this community, about the community? And that's what's been fun to work with.
Now, just kind of one more question about that before we got to get into the classical nerdy part of this of the podcast is, like, so when you're writing something like this, or really anything you write, do you have an arc in mind, Or do you kind of let the story tell itself as you're writing it?
Yeah, I wish I had an arc in mind. I mean, that would be so sweet. You can't believe how many times for the middle grade books I go to a school and some kid will ask in some situation, do you use an outline? And you see every teacher who's listening here, you just go, you see them, right? It's right there. They go, please say that you use an outline, please. And then I go, no, I really don't. And then every kid cheers.
Yeah.
Right? Like because I've just thwarted their teacher.
That's
but
great.
I really don't. And again, I'm in the early stages of it. So I really write my 500 words. I have no idea what happens tomorrow. I just don't. And maybe at night I'll think about it and maybe it will come to me, or maybe it's just me sitting there playing with the dog before I'm about to start typing. Whatever it is, I hope that somehow it will lead me on to the next interesting idea, or that the idea at least will be interesting. And, again, I mean, the old cliche is this is not brain surgery. I don't have to get it right on the first time.
Right.
So I can mess around with it quite a bit. So right now I'm in the let's have fun with this character. I mean, there's a character who's come here who has a museum of moths. And, you have to wonder, is that possible? But there are all these books from the early part of last century about hawk moths. I don't even know what a hawk moth is, but I was so intrigued by the title, right? So I bought a bunch of these old 1910 books about experts on hawk moths. And I thought, okay, here's my guy, right? Here's my guy who loves this. No one else cares about this, but he does.
Yeah.
And that kind of passion, that's really interesting.
So, Jeff, you were saying that Gary was here for episode 25. And that was it maybe February of 21?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so at that time he kind of previewed the Hercules Beal book. If I remember, he kind of told us it was coming along.
Yep, that's correct, yep.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that, Jeff?
I remember that I was very excited about this, and I remember our conversation was a lot about kind of the stories and myths that were meaningful to you growing up, and the myths that kind of keep coming back to you. But I think I got a good intro question to get us into the book is, how did you settle on the myth of Hercules as being kind of the template that would follow and enliven and kind of shape the life of this boy that has the same name?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things going on of course, there's always more than a couple of things. Certainly one of the big ones on this is that a number of the books that I've worked with in the last decade, I suppose, are really explorations of grief and how it is that we grieve, how does that affect us, and particularly how it affects a young kiddo or a middle schooler. Like, how is it that you handle grief and how do you move past grief? And so this feels like the book that, I don't want to say ends the string, because I'm not, who knows, but it feels like the final answer that I'm going to be handing after 4 or 5 books that deal with this.
Yeah.
Not that those books are necessarily connected so much, although there are connections to earlier books in this one. But it feels like as I'm learning how to handle grief and loss, I think that's reflected in the different books that are coming out about it. So Hercules actually is the next to the last one. There'll be one in August as well. And that will probably be the end. And for me, this is going to sound so obvious that it's almost a cliche, right? It's just trite. But you come to the point in your grief where somehow your gratitude for what you had is larger than your grief for what you've lost. And that took me 10 years to come to that point myself. And I think in this book, that's the sort of larger idea, at least that's in me as I'm writing it. I don't know if it's as explicit in the book itself, but I think that that's kind of where I am and in handling that. And I wanted to come to a book that tried to see a kid who has he's lost his parents. He's had a tremendous loss. But he also has, in the course of this book, this community which gathers around him, which he didn't even expect. His brother who comes back, who leaves an amazing job. He travels all over the world for National Geographic.
Right.
And he leaves that to come back to live in this one place. And he too is on an arc. If the book was about him, he would come to the place where he realizes the local can be just as beautiful as the global.
Yeah.
But that feels to me like what I'm trying to think about in this book a lot. How can you get to the point when you're just grateful?
Yeah. And was there a particular aspect of the kind of the Hercules cycle from Greek mythology that you said, okay, this one would work better than say Perseus or fill in the blank.
Well, Hercules, I mean, he's such a fascinating character, right? I mean, he's not a god. He becomes that, but he is not a god for most of his life, right? And he has a huge advantage, his strength, which can overcome so very, very much. This one big, big advantage. But he also makes very, very bad decisions again and again and again. And he doesn't seem all that great at learning from those experiences. So even, I mean, you bring your good friend, your servant, Diomedes, is it Diomedes?
It's Iolaus, I think. Isn't it Iolaus' nephew? And maybe you're thinking of a different story.
Well, this is the one where he's killed by the horses. He leaves the...
Oh, they're the mares of Diomedes.
Yeah.
He's with his shield bearer.
Okay.
Yes.
And so he leaves him behind as he goes to mess around. And you just go, really? How smart is that? You leave this younger guy who doesn't have your abilities, who's not strong like that, and you leave him with all the horses when you know that the horses eat people? I mean, doesn't that seem like a really bad decision? And he does that again, again, again.
Yeah.
And that makes him, I think, a really fascinating character, just because he isn't a god who has all these great powers and all this great wisdom necessarily.
Right.
But he is incredibly fallible. So despite this great advantage, it doesn't always work so well for him.
Yeah.
And he goes to these 12 labors, at least in part, because he too is dealing with grief.
Right.
And so because of that, this job has been handed to him. So when Danny Hupfer hands him, recognizes what grief is doing to this kid and how he's overwhelmed by it, he gives him pretty much exactly the same task that Hercules is given, that the mythical Hercules is given.
Yes.
Like, work through this. And as you work through this, maybe you too will grow in some ways. You will see other things that you didn't anticipate.
Right.
And he does. I mean, he comes to moments of great sympathy and empathy for animals, like the one-eyed cat that he's so afraid of, or the coyotes that are released up to Maine. And he assumes when the coyote comes out that he is unchanged. When the guy is going to let the coyote out of the cage, 2 coyotes, he assumes that coyote hasn't changed at all. And when the guy says, you know what he's going to look like when he enters out of this cage into this wild, wonderful land, Hercules says, he'll hate you. And the guy says, no, it's happiness beyond belief.
Yeah.
And he repeats it, happiness beyond belief. And I think that's him growing when he learns that. He's going to recognize that it doesn't have to be that hate. It can be gratitude.
Right. I know that one of the things that I often emphasize to my myth students when I teach Heracles is that, and you already kind of inferred this, that makes him different than a Jason or a Perseus is that the labors that he's doing, he's not doing it to save a town, to rescue a princess, to get a prize. He's really kind of working off his own grief and guilt for killing his family.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And that's what makes it, I think that's what makes him in the Greek canon, one, wholly unique. And I think it's one of the reasons that I think the Greeks and the Romans and then beyond find him so relatable. Yeah. Because he's this broken figure.
That's exactly right. And so here's Hercules Beal, who blames himself unfairly for the accident that kills his parents. It's not the case that he's at fault in any way, but that's the way he's dealing with it.
Yeah.
And his way of dealing with it early on in the book and for much of the book is to feel guilt when there really isn't any for him. But he has to get past that, just as the mythical Hercules has to get past his own sense of loss.
So I have only really 2 questions about the book. They're big ones. Jeff has a whole bunch of excellent and detailed questions, so he's going to have to carry the majority of this. But my 2 questions are, how do you combine so well, to my mind, the tragic and the comic? And I'll elaborate on that in a second. And then the second question is, which of the 12 labors was the most difficult to adapt to the structure or the skeleton of the story? Because some seemed like they flowed well. I mean, others flowed well too, but I thought, that's got to be like the Stymphalian birds in the swamp.
Yeah.
That's got to be more of a challenge. But to the first question, when I'm reading at home, sitting down, lying on the couch or something, I often talk to the book, right? I'll interact, and so my family will say, was that for me? What are you talking about? I'll make some grunt or some chuckle, and so the experience of reading this book was just a lot of laughter at times, or kind of, a perplexed, I didn't see that coming, that sort of thing. So how do you combine those two, in some ways, very different voices of the tragic and comic?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which is so astonishing about human beings is that we are able to hold extraordinarily different moods and beliefs, I suppose, too, but moods or responses together. And I think the great example of that is a funeral, where you can be at this memorial service and you're weeping. I mean, this is grandma or whatever, who is gone and irrevocably gone. I mean, she's not going to come back. And there's that terrible grief that you experience within the framework, often a liturgical framework. And then you leave and you go to the lunch at someone's house, and there are sandwiches that are cut without the crust, that sort of stuff. And there are baked goods and all these things. And you're with perhaps people that you haven't seen for a while. I mean, it's the whole family's come together, and maybe some of them live in California, and so you don't see them that often. But now that everyone's come together for this event. And then you start telling stories. Like, do you remember when grandma fell into the lake when she was trying to fish, and everyone starts to laugh? Or you remember whatever, maybe it's a tender story, but often they're very, very funny stories. And then you sit back for a moment, and this happened to me at my grandmother's funeral, and you wonder, oh my gosh, grandma died a few days ago, and it's horrible, and I can't believe I'm laughing right now, or I can't believe I'm even having a good time. I mean, I'm having a good time. That, I think, is a wonderful thing in us, and probably keeps us from going insane, that we can have those two things together. And so in this one, I don't think I could write a book, particularly for a young reader, which is, unendingly morbid or just terribly sad. There are people who can, Dostoevsky can do that. But it's just, again and again, I don't feel like I can just have, this is sad, oh my gosh, this is even sadder, let's do another sad one. I'm not sure I would read that book. I'm not sure I could write that book. And I don't think it's true. I hope it's not true. But I do think I can write a book that says, here's what an extraordinarily complex thing we are as human beings. How amazing that we have this capability. And I can put the funny and the hard together, because I think everyone knows that that's true. We have that experience. We do have that capability. And it feels real to me. It feels less like I'm the author who's trying to write a Hallmark card. Everything is happy and, pink pony goes to puppy dog land kind of stuff. And I don't want to also write the everything is awful sort of thing. So that, I think, is right at the center of what I believe we are as just people. And I mean, even, you read through the Gospels, it isn't hard to sense in some of those stories, although maybe I'm reading around the edges too much, it isn't hard to sense humor in Christ, where you got to believe that he's got a smile on his face. Or like, I don't know, when the guy complains, well, who's my neighbor? You got to know that Christ is thinking, gotcha.
Yeah.
This is it. And I just have to believe that there's a smile there. Or other ones where, I don't know, Mary and Martha, when they come and they really accuse him when Lazarus is right there, you got to believe that when Jesus goes to weep, it's because his best friends have just accused him. He knows that Lazarus is about to wake up. I mean, it's going to be fine in just a second, although it's pretty hard on Lazarus, let's just say that. But it's got to have been so hurtful that Mary and Martha say exactly the same thing to him. Lord, if you were here, which sounds like an accusation, jerk, if you didn't show up when we needed you. And since they both say exactly the same thing, you know that they've talked about it. I mean, that's a different kind of, so I love those ideas of trying to make us complex and to show both sides of things. And I think that's true in this book too.
Yeah, you were talking about that Hercules, because going through this valley of grief, but he does have this wonderful community around him. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that struck me about the book is that indeed, and certainly as the book kind of gets towards the end, you really feel that and see that He is not coddled. He does not. The lieutenant colonel, this teacher, does not coddle him. His brother does not coddle him. Even his relationship with Ellie is pretty kind of in your face and honest. And so there are almost no characters that say, oh, poor Hercules.
Right. He doesn't get that, especially from his teacher.
Yeah.
And that's actually Danny from Wednesday Wars, Danny Hupfer. There are hints there that first off, he remembers losing Holling, his good friend, because Holling has been killed in a previous book. But he's also someone who's lost many of the guys in his platoon, in one of the platoons. And it's only barely hinted at in the book. But in my mind, this is a guy, a colonel, who has experienced the loss of men and knows how hard that is. And that affects the way he speaks. It's not always explained, but that's sort of there for me when I'm writing that. You're right. He doesn't coddle him. He recognizes that this is a hard truth, and that even when he gets to the point when he comes to understand that he isn't responsible for the loss of his parents, he still lost his parents.
Yeah,
that isn't going away.
Right.
I think, Jeff, this would be a good time to break for the ads. I don't think there's going to be any funny segue. I think the topics here are too serious and dear. What do you think?
Sounds good. It's time for the ads.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee. Ratio, the inventor, the entrepreneur, as we say. The inventor is a man named Mark Helweg, a former student of mine, now ruling the coffee world, out in Portland, Oregon. And he's been with us for quite a while now on the show, hasn't
he? Yes, he has. He's been a loyal supporter, and we're really thankful for him. Yeah.
Did you have any coffee this morning, Jeff?
I did. It's been especially important to me these last 3 weeks.
Okay.
In that my coughing has been so bad that I am exiled to the couch.
Oh, no.
So I'm downstairs, but one of the small blessings there is that I'm very close to the kitchen. And so every morning when I hit that button on my Ratio 8, I am overwhelmed with the wonderful smells and that great sound that comes from that machine.
Yeah.
So last couple of weeks, I felt very close to my Ratio 8.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I can say that my Stoic facade has eroded a little bit.
Oh, yeah?
Well, you're surprised.
Yeah, I am a little bit surprised. Yeah.
Well, I just realize that it's okay for me to enjoy the very homely ritual of making my coffee and pushing the button.
Yes.
You could have told me this 20 years ago. It's not a sign of some moral or philosophical weakness to enjoy one's coffee ritual.
No, not at all.
And
right.
so I do enjoy it.
Yes.
And the Ratio just keeps producing fine coffee.
Yep. And not only that, it's a beautiful machine to look at. It's sleek. I've got the stainless steel. You've got, is it the oyster with the walnut accents, right?
It's an oyster shell color, kind of it's what an oyster shell looks like.
Yeah.
Grayish white, complements the cabinets and the walnut accents.
It's great. And so the Ratio produces these wonderful machines, the 6 and the 8, and coming soon, this Ratio 4, which is more attainable from a price point.
That's right.
I'm looking forward to this thing coming out because it's going to be the same great quality.
Yes.
But maybe more accessible for a lot of our listeners out there.
Absolutely. I'd like to read a little bit of the ad copy here for the 4. The first affordable and beautiful half-batch pour-over coffee machine, the 4, is our smallest brewer yet, an agile, sleek machine, just like Jeff, that puts out between 5 and 20 ounces of coffee per batch, enough for 1 to 2 reasonably sized cups or 1 big travel mug. Brews, with a bloom cycle in 4 minutes or less. Removable water tank, small enough to fit on any countertop, built to last, backed by a 4-year warranty.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm excited for this to come out.
Absolutely.
And our listeners, can benefit from our offering. And so, listeners, do yourself a favor. Go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIO coffee.com. Find one of these machines that you like. And Dave, what's our coupon code?
Our coupon code for the month of March is ANCO6S.
Yes, and I'm really tempted to that S to stand for smart, but I know we're supposed to go there, right? Yeah.
How about smizzling?
Smizzling. Yes, get yourself a smizzling cup of coffee.
A smizzling offer for the month of March, ANCO6S.
Check it out. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good folks at Hackett Publishing. Dave, right now I'm trying to get a jump on things, and I'm looking. I'm offering a couple of new courses in the fall.
Excellent.
And so I'm looking for textbooks, right? And it is depressing when you go out there and you look at what textbook costs, even paperbacks cost for students nowadays. And
low quality, high price.
High price. It's ridiculous. And so in doing that, it makes me so thankful that every time I teach my myth class, I can order Stanley Lombardo's translation of Homer's Odyssey, and I can say, you can get this brand new, wonderfully attractive, excellent translation for about $8.
Yes, notes, annotations. I think it has a glossary.
Yeah.
It's a comprehensive learning tool. And like you said, $8.
It is. And that's not an outlier.
Right.
Right. So if you go to hackettpublishing.com and you check out these offerings, a wide array of translations from various subject matters, not just classics, but from all around the academic community. And what you're going to find there is not low quality, high price. You're going to find high quality and a very reasonable price.
That's correct. And some potential competitors, right? Like Smack It Publishing.
Yeah.
Books about hitting things.
Right. Yeah.
Whack It Publishing.
Yeah.
That's not where you want to go.
No, exactly. Very limited in their scope, right?
Or Bracket Publishing.
Oh, there's Bracket. That's
you don't know about them?
Is that just about like putting things up on walls?
No. It's more punctuated. It's I think their slogan is parentheses free since '83.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Bracket Publishing.
Yeah.
That's appealing, but they're more than 10 years behind Hackett.
Way behind.
Yeah. And Hackett is our sponsor, so stiff arm all of these competitors. Go to Hackett Publishing, HACKETT, find what you want, drop it in your grocery basket, and then what, Jeff?
And then put in the coupon code AN2024. That's AN ad nauseum plus the current year. And Dave, that will get them
20% off and
free shipping.
Check it out.
All right, as we get back into it, Gary, I wonder if you could attend to David asked the question earlier of which of the 12 labors did you find the most difficult to adapt?
Yeah. A lot of the difficulty in those labors is often that they are very similar. So you get the lion, you bring it back, you kill it or whatever it is. You get the mares, you bring them back, and on and on and on. So there's a ton of ones which just sound like, oh, we've kind of heard this before. So it was at times just difficult to figure out how that was going to work. So that it didn't feel to the reader like this is, again, redux. And a kid particularly is going to be really sensitive to that and just say, this isn't working. But of all of them, I think the most difficult was the Hydra, because you've got this creature who is, he's 9 heads, and the one head is immortal. What could possibly connect to that? So the Nemean lion, you got a cat, right? A really ugly cat. And that feels, okay, I got that. That seems to work fine. But the Hydra was hard. And so in the end, you really kind of go back, or at least I kind of go back to my own life. And I can remember being in a hospital for heart issues. And all the blame machines that are all around you, that are tied to you somehow, or the tubes that are in you. And I can remember at one point counting them, and there were 10 tubes in me. And I'm thinking, really? This is crazy. And being just a little bit desperate about it and trying to be funny with the nurses. But it really isn't all that funny. So I remember the time I was sort of desperate because I wasn't sleeping. And you're awakened like every 3 hours or 2 or 3 hours or so to take blood or to do this or to do that through the night. And I said to the nurse, you know what? If you wake me up, if you keep doing this, I'm going to find a place to hide in here. And she made fun of me. She goes, you got like all these tubes in you. You're not going anywhere. And I said, I'm going to move over to that couch and you won't even know where I've gone. And she goes, yeah, that's what'll happen. Well, that night she did wake me up, and I really was desperate about it. And so I gathered all those tubes, got off the bed. Oh, and she also said, if you do this, you'll tear something. Something will tear out. And I said, well. So I gathered all of them, and I moved over to the bed, because I was to the couch, I should say, because it was a little further away, out of the lights, the lights that are coming in from the hall. And I remember doing this so distinctly because you hear the beep, beep, beep that's going on. Got onto the couch, fell asleep, and fell out. I fell off.
Oh, no.
Just as she had said I was going to do. And I was so embarrassed, so I climbed on. And what I didn't realize is that I had indeed, just as she had said, torn out one of the tubes.
Did that set off like alarms?
No, there was nothing. So I got back under the bed. They came, I don't know, hours later, and one of the nurses said, "Wow, how did this thing get out?" And I go, like I'm in kindergarten, right? I go, "I don't know." So so I remembered that, and so that becomes the way I handled it, where you've got all these tubes, and it becomes just that mechanism that you use all those tubes in for the guy who's lying there, which seems to me sort of Hydra-ish. Plus, it has the advantage of that moment when there's the last tube that you want to get out so desperately, and it hangs and it hangs and it hangs because you're just so eager to be out of this hospital and out of this controlled environment. And so that felt like it would work, but it took forever. I mean, I did other animals, and I did, just all sorts of things, and it took a long time to figure out this would work.
So those kinds of things would go into the book's blooper reel or the outtakes. The final chapter would be all the false starts.
There we go.
Do you keep all your notes on those things that didn't work, make the final cut?
No, I throw it all away as we move along, which is probably a bad thing, right? But I do. I tend to toss everything or cut it. A lot of my pages, since I work with a typewriter and not a computer, they literally are cut with scissors and then taped on or over each other, just so I could keep going without sort of retyping the whole thing. So I don't keep those. I probably should.
One of the things I really liked about how you used and incorporated the myths in these very kind of non-literal kinds of ways. So when we opened with the Nemean lion and with the cat, I said, okay, I can kind of see where this is going. And I was kind of wondering, how these labors are going to reveal themselves to Hercules. And one of the things I really liked before any of it begins is what Hupfer says to Hercules when he gives him the assignment. And he's telling him, you got to perform these things. You go, what are you talking about, right? And he says this is on page 43. The strangeness of these myths is how often they subtly enact themselves in our lives. But we notice them only when we're watching closely, as I hope you will be, because with watching will come recognition, and with recognition, understanding of their relevance. And I thought that was, often when I teach mythology, I try to impress upon my students that this stuff is cool.
Yeah.
And things that are cool are worth studying, but it's got to be more than that. Yeah. And so so how to kind of describe how these myths can add meaning to their lives, or a lens through which they can see their lives, is always a challenge. So I loved how Hupfer kind of condensed that. And what I noticed, it might have happened before this, but I noticed a shift, and I think it was the Stymphalian birds, where the chapter opens, and it's kind of no longer Hercules looking for the labors to reveal themselves, but he already has the myth as a frame. Mm-hmm. And he says, and he's talking about how the difficulty of that labor relating to the difficulty of his own lives, and he's already using the myth as a lens to see his life, rather than just kind of letting something kind of reveal itself. And I thought that was a really kind of cool way to kind of see him grow in that.
Yeah, that's great that you saw it that way, because that's exactly what I'm hoping, that the myths don't just become I don't know. At first, it's sort of like, okay, here's like a hurdle, right? Just that's all it is, and I have to figure out how this is going to move me along, or just get through this assignment, really. And you see that also in the way he responds to him, where he has to write the 150-word response,
right? And
he counts the words because he wants to be done at 150. So each of those early entries is 150 words. But as the book goes along, exactly 150. As the book goes along, he abandons that. And now he's much more into it and recognizes how powerful these stories can be in his own life, and how in reenacting them, it's not just to fill an assignment after the end, after a while, but it's to be something bigger, something larger in his life.
Yeah.
And to grow in terms of empathy and understanding, and to recognize maybe that the people that are around him are really responding. So Mr. Moby, for example, who turns out to be this really kind person who does things he doesn't want to do to take care of him, to bring the dog who's hurt.
He's the bus driver.
He's the bus driver, right? Or the sculptor. Oh, this is Mrs. Savage. That's right.
Circe character, right?
Yeah. I love her, and she's modeled after Augusta Savage, who was the great sculptor, the last great artist of the Harlem Renaissance to pass away. And she did. So when I'm thinking of that, she did this amazing piece called The Harp for the 1939 World's Fair, which was, she couldn't afford to cast it, but she painted it black. And then because she couldn't afford to keep it or move it, they destroyed it. No kidding. This just was destroyed. But anyway, I'm thinking of her as I'm writing about Mrs. Savage here. And the hippo and her husband, who is also, at that point, I'm thinking about Nancy Schoen, who's a sculptor who does these giraffes. And when I asked her once, why giraffes? She said, it's my husband. He was tall and lanky. And I never kind of thought about that, but every time she does these giraffes, that's what she's thinking of. She's the artist who did the ducklings, Make Way for Ducklings ones in the Boston Public Garden. Wow. So yeah, she's involved in that in my head anyway, as I'm talking about those as well.
So I'm wondering about the character of Viola, whom I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
From the beginning, I could tell a little bit, the way that you described her, I think I could tell a little bit, she's going to have some surprises. She's going to turn out to be something in the life of Hercules that he didn't expect,
right.
But I couldn't see exactly what. And I wonder, does she stand in for Athena? Is she a muse, or was there nothing like that going on?
Yeah, no, it wasn't consciously one of the mythic elements. She just intrigued me. I mean, this person who stays out of the sun, who probably has some medical reason for doing it, but I didn't really explore that because Hercules doesn't know it. Who in the end is really the first person to recognize that he has matured. Because all along, she also is the first person to realize he never says what's truly, truly deep down. Until finally, it's quite late in the book, when he's worried that their relationship, his brother's relationship and Viola's is about to explode. He's the one who goes to talk to her about it, not to confront, but to try and understand. And finally says the truth, which is that he can't abide the idea of losing someone else. I can't do it again. I can't do it again. And because of that, she's the one who says to him, okay, you're not his baby brother anymore.
Right.
And he is now matured because he has been able to speak what is true, not just to Viola, but to himself. I mean, that's the great worry here, that he will lose someone else.
It also struck me too is that that Hercules, with Viola, he jumps in using another myth as a frame of reference, which is wrong. Right?
Yeah.
She's a vampire.
Yeah,
right?
Completely wrong.
So yeah, so he's doing the same kind of thing that he's doing with the Hercules myth, but he's got it backwards.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah,
that was great. Yeah. I'm wondering that another thing that often comes up when I teach Hercules in my myth class is that, and these kids will read these stories in their kind of unvarnished original form for the first time, is that certainly from a modern point of view, very few people say that these are stories for kids, right? It's full of murder, rape. The comic side of Hercules is often centered around drunkenness and sex.
Yeah.
And I wondered, I noticed that when you talked about, so early on in the book, when you talk about Heracles losing his family, you're very gentle with that. I mean, later on when Hercules writes about it, he mentions that Heracles killed his family.
Yeah.
But I mean, was that a challenge for you to try to, I got to soft pedal some of these elements that are so raw in the original?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the difference between writing for a middle grade audience and an adult audience for me right now. I am not going to say, blatantly and obviously how it is that family is killed. And it's just too awful, right? Yeah. It just feels too awful, and even in a sense unforgivable. And if I start out there, then oh my, I don't know how you recover from that.
Right.
And that you do have to be. I think it's also important if you're writing in this field for this audience to recognize that you could do harm. You could do harm by doing the wrong thing in terms of how something like that is handled. And I'm just super sensitive to that. I don't want that to happen. I had a friend who was a priest who was new to a school, a Jesuit school. He comes and he's teaching them Beowulf. And there's a scene when Unferth taunts Beowulf because he doesn't think that he's good. Beowulf's probably 14, 15 years old. So he taunts him as a seasoned warrior. Weren't you the guy who went out to to go after Brecca, to have a contest, and you lost, didn't you? So why should we think that you're going to take on Grendel now? He just really taunts him horribly. And Beowulf's response to him is to taunt him and then to say at one point, and who are you? You killed your own brother. Well, this priest is teaching that. He was very dramatic, and it was a small honors class with English students. And so he's acting it out, right? So he's acting out Beowulf, and he just picks his kid. He doesn't know these kids. He picks this kid and points to him and said, who are you? You killed your own brother. Well, that summer, that kid had killed his own brother in an accident with a gun. And the whole class goes absolutely white, and Jim doesn't know what has happened, goes into the group of teachers later on and says, this is what happened in class, and everyone just stopped, and they all did the same thing because he had killed his brother. That haunts me. That story haunts me as a teacher, and I would try and avoid anything that would do something like that for a kid.
That's really interesting. That's really an excellent answer. I have a question about allegory, if I may.
Sure.
Okay. I was talking with a friend recently about the Chronicles of Narnia books, and I remember loving those as a kid and reading. I read them through many times, and then when I got in 7th grade, someone told me, that's an allegory for the Christian faith. And I guess I was just such a poor reader that I had never noticed. And then once the person told me, most of the pleasure of the books was gone.
Yes.
Even though I reread them, but when I reread them, I enjoyed them because I was interested in how did Lewis do this? I was a more mature thinker and thinking about, so what turns does he take and what is his word choice and so forth. But the just pure joy of the storytelling was completely sucked out of it by learning that it was an allegory. And I'm wondering, how did you write this book, which has allegorical overtones, if that's the way to put it, and how did you navigate those different steps?
I was in a Hasidic school north of Indianapolis once, and in a break, the librarian asked me, we just got the set of Narnia Chronicles and to add to our library, and then she said to me, I've heard that this is like about Jesus and all of that. Did I make a mistake? This is a Hasidic school. And I said to her, what I'll say now, Lewis was asked that question, is it an allegory? And he insisted it wasn't. And his argument, I don't know if this is him trying to avoid, right? Maybe it's just avoidance. But he said that Aslan is to Narnia what God is to our world. But it's not meant to cross the other way. It's not meant that Aslan is God. I don't know. That feels like avoidance to me. I kind of get what he's saying, but I don't know. And I don't want to do that in this, obviously. And my advantage in writing for this audience is that it's that kind of understanding would be before, like what you were just saying. You read it as a kiddo just for the sheer pleasure. And I think most of these books, or most of these stories, when I read them for the myths, I read them for sheer pleasure, and I never thought of them as allegorical in any way. And I think you're right. I think I would have been not bored, but disenchanted by that kind of a reading of it. So I don't go there in this, at least consciously, I guess, that this is meant to be this, or sort of that sort of thing. Because for that very reason, let's go for this point. Let's just go with the pleasure of the story. It's sort of like reading. Oh my gosh, I can remember 6th grade reading "Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening," that Robert Frost poem, and the teacher calling on me. And I was enchanted with that poem. I thought it was fantastic. And she goes, stand up and tell us what it is. So we had to stand up in Mrs. Condilla's class. And I did. And I said, it's about a guy who is going through the woods. It's beautiful. And he's stopping because it's such a lovely evening. But he's got stuff to do. So kind of reluctantly, he goes on. And I thought I was pretty smart. I kind of got it. And she said, no. She just goes, no. And I remember sitting down going, oh my gosh, I really missed it. And the answer that she gave was, it's a story about death. And I went, well, crap, no, it's not. It's about death, really? And then I knew that poetry was written in code. And I didn't have the code, and my teacher did, and she could figure it out. So and now I look back and I go, what a lousy thing to do to me.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? It is a story. It is a poem about a guy who's busy and he stops and he likes it and he's just enjoying it. And yeah, he's got stuff to do, but he's been here with his horse. That's kind of cool. I mean, it is that poem. And maybe it's other things too. But when I'm a kid, it's enough.
If we could go back to, you were talking about being sensitive to your audience and what things you put in, what things you leave out. I mean, I thought what was quite impressive about this book, and I see this in your other books as well, is that it's still pretty raw. You know, it's an unflinching look at grief and loss. But I wonder, what do you think of an author like a Lemony Snicket, who kind of revels on every page in kind of how dark this is? I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a hard answer, a hard thing to talk about, because I don't want to disparage another writer, right?
Right.
I guess I would say that what he does is very different from what I do.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that what he does is bad or wrong or whatever. I do think it's the case, and maybe this is thinking about my own childhood so much. I do think it is possible to do pretty dark things to kids. Mm-hmm. And somehow I want to come out of this. I want them to come out of an experience of reading what I have to say, thinking that the world is more beautiful, that the world is bigger, that it's, I know, here's the Calvinist thing, that it's a terribly broken world, but it's a world that can be renewed, and that we can learn to live in this world and make it better. I don't want to send any message that would say the opposite, that this is a terribly dark world and there is nothing for it but just to sort of live until you die, that kind of thing.
Right.
He's wicked funny. Snicket is, and so maybe his salvation there is that he is so funny, and I don't know, but I'm just not going to go there myself. Gotcha. Fine, and that's just me versus someone else. Those are different choices.
One of the things that I loved about Hercules Beal, and we hope that all of our listeners will buy a copy and read it, if they haven't already. I know already that some of our listeners are diehard fans, but the adolescent dialogues, so believable, like the refrain of "oh boy," which he's always saying. So after I read it and my 12-year-old daughter read the book, it's a shared experience now, which you can't do with a lot of books, honestly. At least not anymore. Maybe because things have changed in some ways in terms of genre expectations. But so we went around the house for a few weeks saying to each other, "Oh boy," you know, because of that refrain. That's a charming aspect that I would say is along the lines of the comic, so that the heavier themes are delivered with a pinch of grace or something. Yeah. Is that what you were after?
Oh yeah, I mean it's I can't get a book really moving unless I hear the voice, and that for me is the very first thing. It's not what first happens. It's not the problem at the beginning. I need to hear the narrator's voice there. And it has to be somewhat distinctive, that there has to be something that's special about it so that you can hear it every time this character speaks. Mm-hmm. And that's his thing. Colonel Hupfer is very different. He's much more serious. He's seen some horrible things. He's lived some horrible things. And his voice is much more commanding. I mean, he's a colonel, right? I mean, it would be silly to have something that is mollycoddling or something. So it feels like the voices of your characters are going to really make your characters. So for me, I mean, sometimes I get complaints about this, like where you don't describe what the character looks like. And I tend not to, especially in first person, where a first person narrator isn't going to stop to give a description of so-and-so. But for me, it's not the physical side of what these guys look like is less important than what they hear, what the reader hears.
Yeah, I would just point out that in the Gospels, right, there are almost no physical descriptions of any of the characters.
Really?
In all 4 of the Gospels. And so I think you're in good company.
Okay.
There. What did the apostles look like? I mean, Peter apparently was a big fisherman, but hair color, eye color, stature, even age, there's really nothing that we would consider necessary. And yet these are the most compelling stories.
Wow. So you just have to figure, since they are fishermen, that he's got to be a bigger guy, right? Because they're pulling in all these fish.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I liked a lot I can call them like Easter eggs, like the stuff that's kind of sprinkled in there that I think are for the adults, and some references that I don't think not necessarily a middle school kid would get today.
Sure.
So I loved reading your book out loud to my son gave me an occasion to introduce him to Nosferatu. Which is you really want to see this? And then secondly, I just to clarify something. So Coach Sanders, who says that his cousin is the greatest running back of all time, we're talking about Barry, right?
Yeah,
of course,
Barry Sanders.
And then of course Eleanor Rigby.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. But I thought that was perfectly chosen because all the lonely people, right? She's right in there with him.
Right, exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah.
And WOTV Channel 8 made a cameo appearance
see that.
in here.
That's right.
Yeah. And Dr. S. Klatt, one of our former colleagues, I think, is probably mentioned.
That's Lou Klatt.
And then the refrain of Tough World, does that come from, is that a Bill Van de Koppel?
It is Bill Van de Koppel.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's, a dear friend that I miss a lot. And that was his line. He always said it funny, right? He meant it to be kind of funny, but it wasn't just funny. And he would just say, no, this is a real problem. How are you going to solve it?
Yeah.
We should tell the audience who that is, though, right? Because they don't know.
Right. Yes.
And I don't either. So go ahead, Gary.
Oh, Bill was the chair of the English department at Calvin University for a number of years, and a linguist, brilliant writer. He sort of moved from writing academic pieces to essays about his family history and memoir. He was also probably just the most encouraging person I've ever met. He would write you notes after he got your teaching evaluations to say, you're doing good.
Oh, wow.
And it was just a wonderful guy to be around. He was also a golfer who was as competitive as all get out. And I never beat him. I never even thought I would beat him. But just a wonderful, good friend. And so that was his line. Yeah, it's a tough world.
Well, Jeff, speaking of wonderful people,
yes,
I think we probably ought to wrap this up and give Gary back some of his time so he can go do all the things that a successful retired writer does.
Indeed. Yeah. So, Gary, thank you so much for joining us again.
I got one more thing to tell you, though.
Please do.
Okay, because I thought, as I was driving over here, I thought I got to make sure I let these guys know this. So I'm doing a number of books these days with a colleague, right, with several different colleagues. And one of them is Ron Kirchie, who's brilliant. He wrote for TV. You remember Hill Street Blues?
Of course.
He wrote Hill Street Blues.
Oh, wow.
So we have this book out, and it kind of is right up your alley. And it's a kid who's in the Peloponnesian Wars. He's Athenian.
Oh, yes.
And he is killed during a Spartan raid. So he is, was it 450 BC or something like that, around there. So he's in Hades as the book opens, and he has been trying to get out of Hades for years, trying to figure out how to get past the dog, get over the rivers, get out of Hades and back to Athens. And so after 2,500 years, he finally gets past all these obstacles and heads up this long path. And there he sees a metal door. And this kid from ancient Athens opens it up, and he is in the 7th grade boys' bathroom of a middle school in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So it's the story of this kid from ancient Athens now trying to acclimate to this world, knowing that Hades is going to send folks after him. And Ron is brilliant, and it's been so much fun to work with this. Just really, really hysterically funny.
That sounds great, and we want to read it, and we're going to ask you for his phone number so we can get him on the show.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fantastic. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So, hey, thanks again so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Well, Jeff, I think it's just about time to get out of here. There's someone banging on the doors.
Can you tell who it is?
Yeah, I think I can.
Okay.
They're trying to get in, and they can't quite see us, but they have these little devices that shine this kind of red lasery beam sort of thing.
Well, I can see that on the wall over there.
Yeah, it's the Infrared Poet Society.
So they only read poetry which shows up under certain spectrums?
That's correct. So, if you hand them a book of poetry and it's incandescent or fluorescent or LED.
Yeah.
No dice.
No way.
No, but the Infrared Poet Society, they got it going on. As they say.
Exactly.
You ever thought about submitting an application to be a part of that group?
I am now.
Yeah.
This sounds fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I've always liked those little laser beam lights, or have you ever used them like in a lecture?
Yes, I don't think that's infrared. But
it's not?
For the sake of this gimmick, we'll just pretend.
Okay, exactly. See, I need to sign up because I know nothing about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're Infrared Poet Society material, though.
It's
frankly.
Probably not. Well, let's get out of their way.
Okay, all right.
And before we go, we got people to thank as always.
Yes, we do. We have some
yes
products to plug.
Oh, we do. Exactly right. So before we do, should we thank some people and then we can plug some products?
First we thank, then we plug.
Yes. All right. So we got to thank Mishka, of course.
Yes.
Our wonderful engineers got to do a little bit more heavy lifting every time we have a guest.
Yes.
And so we're thankful for how she makes us sound and our guests sound so great. These musicians, Scott, Ken.
Yep, Scott Van Zen with the wheedly deedly screaming arpeggio guitar guy, right. The intro, the outro, talented fellow.
Yeah, as we mentioned in the interview, there are those artists that make you want to give up.
These guys,
both those guys make you want to give up.
Yeah, he's got a sixth finger on that right hand, I think.
No, I don't know how he does it.
It's incredible.
Right. And Dave, how about can you tell us something about the Moss method and
sure.
Latin lingua per se illustrata?
Close enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So the Moss method for Greek is something I've developed. Takes you from
neophyte to erudite.
Yes, and I'm just really grateful that that slogan has been used because someone contacted me this week and said, I'm ready to go from neophyte to erudite.
There it is. It's in the water.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah, it's taking hold. So Moss, 4 modules. Each module is 40 video lessons where I am taking my studies of and teaching of the last nearly 30 years now. Wow. And compressing it down and making it self-paced, expert, and accessible with quizzes and assignments. Plus, each Friday you get to interact with me and other Greek students from around the world in our Zoom office hours.
Yes.
So it's an excellent value. I'm very confident we'll get modules 3 and 4 finished very soon. I would say it's about 2 years of college level Greek without some of the disadvantages of learning in that way.
Fantastic. So, yeah. And how about if somebody wanted to learn Latin?
Sure. So they should go to latinperdiem.com/LLPSI. The Lingua Latina per se illustrata, Latin teaches itself, by Hans Orberg. And I put together a cast of characters, folks like Katie and Lauren and Josh and Kenneth, and I'm teaching them Latin in the studio, so to speak, on Zoom. And you as a student can follow along. And if you've thought, well, Latin sounds interesting, and those guys, Jeff and Dave, are blathering on about it all the time, but it's just not approachable for me. I just have to say, you're wrong.
Yeah.
It is approachable. Mm-hmm. Learn this way. It's really fun. I got one nice comment this week where the person said, I'm taking Unit 1, and I'm really interested in Unit 2. Are you going to have the same crew back on?
Oh, man.
Because he said, it's so entertaining to watch you interact with these students and watch the back and forth. And I thought, watching people learn Latin entertainment value, I didn't realize it, but it's there.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice.
So you're going to have to get this crew back together.
I got most of them back together.
Fantastic.
I got the charming ladies. We swapped out the guys because they had other obligations, but we brought in 2 charming new guys. So
all right.
It's going to be good.
Excellent.
And so latinperdiem.com/LLPSI. And like I've said many times, you may find a better course. I can't say, but I'm very confident you will not find a better value.
Fantastic. And hey, listeners, if you want a shout out, if you got questions, a comment, if you want to pass stuff along, I think we got something from Ron this week, didn't we?
We did. Ron.
Ron comes through again.
Yeah, you do Ron.
Yes. So if you want to be the next Ron,
yes,
you can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget that V.
Or write to Jeff, especially if you're Ron. Write to Jeff at adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V.
Yep.
Ron is our Australian correspondent.
Yes.
We like to poke a little fun at him and then not answer his emails. Yeah. But you can be like Ron and just tell us what you like about the show, what you don't like, ideas for new episodes, etc.
Sounds great.
What if they want to get merchandise?
Well, they can go to our website, adnauseum.com, and they can pick out a shirt, a mug, sticker, hat, show your style, show you that you are committed to taking in the classics and keeping them down.
That's correct. Jeff, what's on tap for next week?
Is it TBD?
I think it might be TBD. We have a really special guest on the schedule, but we're not sure that person's going to make it into the studio.
Okay.
So we'll just hold off on that.
Sounds good.
Yep.
And I think, Dave, you have our gustatory parting shot.
I do, yes. And this is one from Edith Nesbit,
All right.
The Magic World. This woman is an author. She was a part of the Fabian Party. She was an English socialist. Her dates are 1858 to 1924. And this is what she wrote. I'd like to hear your feedback on it, Jeff, before we say goodbye.
All right.
She says, quote, "There is nothing more luxurious than eating while you read, unless it be reading while you eat. Amabel did both. They are not the same thing, as you will see if you think the matter over."
I feel like I need to think about this for a bit.
So is eating while you read
Yes.
the same thing as reading while you eat?
I mean, at a glance, I would say yes, but
That's how it seems to me.
but clearly, Ms. Nesbitt says that this is something. There's something distinct.
I think we just better leave it there. 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't see any way out of this morass.
No, I do not either. So thanks for listening.